so is it okay if I record this? Because I have to ask permission.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna put this closer. All right. So just tell me a little bit about yourself and like where you came from and so on.
I was born in Breathitt County, Kentucky in 1926. And I lived there a couple of years, and my parents moved to Hazard, Kentucky. And we lived there about 5 years, and I moved to West Liberty, Kentucky on a farm. And my dad was a school teacher, and we farmed too. And that was during the Depression.
Okay, so I should also like take this time, like the break, to let you know that I'm not going to be saying so that doesn't pick it up.
Okay.
But that I am listening. And then I'm going to also write down notes as well. Okay, cool. And like timestamps and stuff. And then do you have like years for like when you moved and stuff? Do you have the year?
I moved to West Liberty, Kentucky in 1936, I believe. I can't remember for sure. And I lived there until I graduated from high school on a farm. And we raised tobacco, corn, cane, and our regular vegetables and stuff, and had fruit trees. And we canned and took care of the food so we'd have winter supply. And we also had hogs and cattle. So there was a lot of work to do. And each one of us had to work.
How many siblings did you have?
There was 7 children and my 2 parents. So I had an older brother, an older sister, then I was born, and then I had a younger brother and 3 younger sisters. And we all grew up on the farm. And it was pretty fun. So we had all had to work. And we went to school. The old schoolhouse we went to was on my dad's farm, because that's the way they did it back then. A farmer would say, yes, you can build a school on my property, but when you don't use the school anymore, the land and the building goes to me, back to me. And that's the way they did it back then. And it was a lot of hard work. We didn't have electric. We didn't have running water. And we heated by wood. We had fireplaces. And we had a well, and we had a spring. And we did not have any of the convenience that people have today, or that some of them had back when I was living like that. And to go to school, our school building that we had all 8 grades in it. And we had 1 teacher. And a lot of the times the teacher rode a horse to get to school. And we had a small post office that was within about a mile of us. And that was the only way that we could get our mail. And it was carried by man on a horseback. The postman was on a horseback. And for me to go to high school then, after I got out of the grade schools, I had to walk over a mile to get to a place and catch a ride with the teacher. And they were 4 of us kids that did that. And the teacher had a pickup truck. And he had his 2 kids in the cab. And we had to ride in the back end. And it was about 3 miles that we rode in the back end of the truck to get to school. He was nice. He did put a cover on it. And so when I went to school, to high school, I didn't know anybody that was in my freshman class, because none of the people that had been in my class in grade school went to high school. They all stayed and worked on the farm. I think they eventually went to high school, a few of them did. But I think there was only 4 in my 8th grade class. And I actually didn't go the year I graduated from the 8th grade. I didn't go to high school, because I didn't have a way to get there. And then that's when I found out I could ride with this teacher. And he was my algebra teacher. So that was kind of fun. And so that's the way I got to high school. And I actually went to high school 3.5 years, but we were only required to have 16 credits. So I ended up with 19 credits when I had 3.5 years in, and I'd had all the required English and history that I had to have, and math. And so my principal told me that I could graduate or leave school at the midterm, but I had to promise to come back and graduate with the class, because there was only 23 of us in the class. So I had to go back and graduate. So I left school in the middle of the year, actually in 1st of January. I was in business college in Lexington, Kentucky. And I found out that they were recruiting from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And so they told us if we could pass the test, the civil service test for the base, when we got through our college, our courses, they would guarantee us a job. And so I was one of them that passed, and out of the group, there was 3 from my class that came. And at the end of 1 year, I was the only one that was still left at the base, working. And I worked there until I retired. I had a couple of breaks in my working. When I had my children, I would quit, and then I would go back then. So I was fortunate that they would hire me.
Would they hire you in at the same rate, or would it?
No, I had to take a reduced rate, but within 6 months I was back to the rate that I had quit at, and I always got a raise. I done real well on getting my raises. And I started out as a secretary, was what I was supposed to be. And then my boss didn't give shorthand or anything else, and I wasn't too busy, so one of the other supervisors had a lot of work that was in the supply requirement and distribution area, and so he asked if I could help him. And so my boss said, "Oh yeah, if I don't have something to do, you can help." And so I started helping him, and because I was good in math, and that's what you had to be able to do. And we did math. We didn't have the computers to do it with. And so as soon as he had a opening, he said to my boss, he says, I'd like to give her a promotion and get her with me." So my boss said, "Well, I don't blame you, and I don't blame her if she would take it, so go ahead." And so I stayed there and did that, and then I got into foreign military sales, international logistics, and actually before that I got into cataloging, where we had to write a description of all the items that the Air Force was buying, and if we bought an airplane, then we each had a certain types of items. We didn't write the description on the whole airplane. We just wrote a description on certain items that we were responsible for. And so we had to do that from drawings and everything else. And then we also had a kind of a pattern that we had to go by and make sure that we had all the information down. And like the manufacturer and the name of the item and the dimensions, and if it's electrical, what the electrical volts was and what the amps were and all of that, or if it was a transformer or switches or capacitors. And we had to be able to know all that and read all the drawings and make sure that we had the right manufacturing numbers, and they always had a code, and write up this long description. And then for them to get cataloged, then we had to send everything to Battle Creek, Michigan at that time. But they were the headquarters of that part of it. So then I went over to foreign military sales or international logistics, and there I was a logistics analyst. And what I had to do then was to know that the airplanes that foreign countries were buying from us, and I had to make sure that they did not order something that didn't belong on a certain airplane that we had sold to them. We had to make sure that they wasn't trying to buy an part for an airplane that we had not sold to them. Like maybe they thought they could upgrade something and get something that was on some of our planes that we wouldn't sell to them, some of our newer planes. So I did that until I retired from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So then after I retired from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, there was a contractor that had a contract that was actually trying to set up a logistics system for a foreign country. And so I hired in as a civilian and worked with them. So I worked there for about 3 or 4 years after I had retired from the Air Force Base. And then I got tired working and I quit. And I haven't really worked since.
How many years did you work for Wright-Pat?
I worked for Wright-Pat. I worked 29 years altogether. And I retired when I was 50. And so then after I retired, I started playing. And my husband and I had sailboats, so we was in a sailboat group, and so we traveled quite a bit of that. We went to national regattas to different states, And along with that, then we got into square dancing. And then we went to state conventions and even to Hawaii for state conventions for square dancing, and traveled a lot with that. So between the square dancing and the sailing, when we both were retired by then, we just traveled all over. And then we did that, and then I got into volunteering to teach line dancing. And then I was in a little investment club that some of us women got together and did, and we called it the Money Club. And then I, for some reason, ended up with a granddaughter. And so she was our joy. And so from then on, I kind of cut down on a lot of things. And then my husband got sick, and so then he passed away. And so I got involved with some of the things the granddaughter was doing, like scouting and soccer and a few other things. I can't remember what all she was in. So that's about the story of my life, other than now I'm 92 years old and kind of back to the senior center. And I've quit traveling. I had done a lot of traveling when I was working, and then my husband and I had done a lot of traveling on our own. And I've been to Hawaii 5 times. I've been on 5 cruises, and I've been in several foreign countries. So that's about the story of my life.
Cool. Do you have like a favorite trip that you went on?
Well, all of my trips to Hawaii was great. We went to, I can't remember now what it was called. We went on a trip to Germany that was with the, sister cities. Dayton had what they call sister city, and that was Augsburg, Germany. And we went with them, and that was a really, really good trip, because we was with some people we knew, not very many. And we rented a car, and we drove around a lot of the places and went back to the Air Force base that my husband had been stationed at when he was in the Air Force. And so that was kind of neat. They were really, really nice to us. They had the German military was in the base at that time because it turned it over to them. And they one of the guys got a staff car and drove us all around the base and took us over to the NCO club and fed us, and that was quite enjoyable. And like I said, we had rented the car, so we drove all over Germany and went to Fürstenfeldbruck and Garmisch, and I can't remember where all we did go. And then I have been over there to the Germans' Oktoberfest, and I also went to Germany along with the square dancers to the World Square Dance Convention. And they did call in English, which surprised me. And so that was a great trip too. And on our cruises we've hit all of the islands, most all of them, and one way or another. I've made several trips to Mexico. I don't intend to go back, but I'd have. And because we were actually looking for a place to live down there, and then my husband got sick, and I decided, no, I don't want to see Mexico again. So I haven't been back, and But we traveled a lot when the kids were little. I think at one time that before they were like 16 years old, that they'd been in about 30 some states, and in Canada and Mexico. So they had traveled quite a bit with us too. And like I said, 30 some states. For some reason I want to say 38, but I can't remember for sure. And of course, you got to go to Hawaii with us. And so I think I've had a pretty full life.
So going back to the Great Depression,
Mm-hmm.
how did that impact you and your family?
We had to feed ourselves. We had to grow what we had to eat. And as I said, we had the farm, so that was, and we had by that time got cattle, so we could milk our own cows, make our own butter, and we canned everything. I mean, and we didn't have a pressure cooker, so it was canning and everything, and I can't remember ever going to bed hungry. I can remember that some people was on, what they called it, I want to say the relief, maybe that wasn't the main thing. But a lot of people was on that. But my dad said, I will feed my family and I'm not taking anything from the government. And he didn't. His brother did, but he didn't. And so I guess it affected us in a way that we didn't notice it because nobody else had much anyhow. And everybody was kind of farmers, and now I do know some of them that didn't live on a farm. They did get relief. And then I guess they came through with the program called the WPA, Work Program Association or Administration. I can't remember what it was called. It was called the WPA. So then that is the way that a lot of the people that wasn't able to take care of themselves was able to go to work and get paid and then take care of their family. And actually my dad worked for a little while on that, but not very long since he was trying to farm and everything. He didn't really have the time. I don't remember what they paid. I think it was very little, but at least you could get a little bit of pay, and they was getting food from the administration. So yeah, people had a rough time then. But you didn't hear anybody complain. Nobody was jealous because somebody else had more than them. And I know we had one little store. It was probably a mile from our house, but they would let people buy stuff and put it on. They put it on a list. You know, they didn't have nothing, no computers or stuff to put it on. They'd write down, yeah, you got potatoes and eggs today, and then when these men that was working for the WPA, when they got their check, they always went in and paid the guy, you know, the grocery. And it was rough back then, but not on kids. I think it was rougher on parents, because us kids didn't know for sure how bad the situation was. And I never got an allowance in my life. I wouldn't know what one was. But when I was going to high school and riding with my teacher in the back end of the pickup truck, I waited on him at a little store. And so the guy was always sweeping his store that morning. He let us inside because it was cold. And he would let us inside, so he was sweeping his floor, you know. And so, I mean, I got kind of tired standing around. I was the only girl, and the others were boys that was going. And so I said to him, I said, well, Mr. Likens, let me sweep. And he said, well, you really want to? And I said, yeah. So I would go get there, make sure I got there early enough to sweep his store. Well, he started giving me a dime for sweeping his store. And so I thought I was doing great. And so with my dime, sometimes instead of packing my lunch, well, then I could buy my lunch for 10 cents. And then when I was taking home ec, when I was in high school taking home ec, well, we had our class right before lunchtime. So then the home ec teacher, they worked out a deal that if some of us kids wanted to come over and, us girls come over and help, and even some of the agriculture boys, why, they would allow us to. So I found out that if I volunteered to do that, then I got my lunch free. So we just did everything reasonable, but everybody back then seemed to be so honest. Nobody was trying to take something from you, Everybody, looked at you, well, you're in the same boat I'm in. So they were all very, very honest people. And but the school teachers that I had in grade school, they would was just like we were. Some of them had graduated from that very school, and most of our school teachers did not have a 4-year college. I'm going to say the majority of them didn't. Maybe I can think of maybe 2 that did. And my dad did not have a 4-year college, but what you did, you had to take a state test after you had so much education. And if you could pass that test, then they would allow you to, you could be a teacher. If you passed the test, then that's what you desired. And I'm sure they had someone that kind of set in with them, start out with. And so my dad had to quit teaching when they required a 4-year college. So it wasn't easy, but we were all in the same boat, and nobody made fun of each other. Maybe there's a few city kids that make fun of us country kids, but who cared? And so it was not a bad life. And if you just made up your mind that, hey, this is the way it is, do what I have to and not complain about it, you could always get out and play ball, or we always had a little game we called a stick and a ball, and so we rolled the ball around with a stick. It wasn't nothing bought from the store. And so I'm not sure kids today could survive.
So, let's see. All right, cool. How did the war affect, the boys who went to school and had to be drafted? How did that affect them?
There was 60 kids in my freshman class when we started. There was only 23 of us that graduated. And every boy that was able-bodied had gone to service, had volunteered or gone to service, and that's why we got down to such a low number. Of course, a few girls dropped out too. But when we graduated, the boys that graduated with us were handicapped or too young to go. The one of them was too young to go to service. Actually, he graduated from high school when he was 16, so he didn't have to go to service. He went later on, but he didn't have to go. So it affected us, and our basketball team went to nothing almost because we just didn't have the men to. I mean, we still had the basketball team, but we didn't win like we was used to winning and things. And because my older brother, he went to service, but he had graduated. He played basketball and was one of their head basketball players. But our sports really went down, which we never was a big sports, and so it did affect them. And I think we had a couple of girls that joined the WACs, I believe is what they joined. And but that's why our class went down from the number that we had, because actually we was probably going to be one of the biggest classes they ever had. And then we cut down, well, one of the smallest, that they'd had one or two that's only about 12 or something like that graduated. But that's when Uncle Walter graduated from there, and I think there was only 12 in his class. But he was a lot older than we were. So yeah, it did affect them, and it affected us even sometimes in getting supplies for school. You know, even maybe because we were so far out in the country, but even getting pencils and paper sometimes. And when we was in high school, we had to buy our books. And, I mean, that was tough sometimes, because what we did, if somebody was ahead of you, you know, some family member, you hung onto them books, and then when had everybody finished, then you sold them. When I say sold them, you practically gave them to them, but you'd say, well, I sold them my books, you know. And we probably didn't get the newest books or the most up-to-dated ones all the time. I'm not sure, you know. But I will have to say that we had reading, writing, and arithmetic. So that was our main things. History was very important, and so was English, and literature was a big one too. We all seemed to enjoy that. But in my last year, they started teaching aeronautics. And science, they had a pretty good science class. And so, but it was just one of those things. But now the school building that I actually went to high school in was built by the WPA, this group that I said that the government had, you know, giving people jobs. And they built, it was built by the WPA. And President Roosevelt actually came there and dedicated it. And so I can't remember for sure what year it says on the building, but I can't remember for sure what year it was dedicated. But it was in the 30s, but I can't remember.
Is it still there after the tornado?
Yes. Matter of fact, when Retta Faye was working for the superintendent office, of course she's retired now, that was the building, that was our old high school building, because they had now built another one that's out from town. It's, you know, about 4 miles from West Liberty. Everything seemed to be moving out West Liberty. So anyhow, it was... And I'm still in contact with one of the girls that I graduated in high school with. And we graduated, actually, officially my diploma says in 1945. So I'm still in contact with her, and she's 94 years old. And I think there's four of us that I know that's still living. So.
Do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I think that's about the end of my story.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
Wow.